Hello? All right, it's on. Okay, should we go ahead and get started?
Yep.
Great. So my name is Sibley Simon. I live here in Santa Cruz, actually over by the mystery spot. And I started working on housing about a decade ago. I'd had some experience in housing before that, but I'd been a technology entrepreneur for 15 years or so, and found some space in my life and started helping around homelessness in Santa Cruz, and got excited with a couple nonprofit leaders in town to help start the 180 initiative. It's now called 180 Together. It's going to celebrate a 10-year anniversary here this fall, and has helped somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,500 people out of long-term chronic homelessness into supportive housing. And I was there not knowing a lot about services, how to help people with homelessness, but just the systems. How do we improve, get way more cooperation between the county systems, the city, the nonprofits, including churches, etc. Everybody is involved. How do we help someone get completely out of homelessness? And so taking that approach of success, how do we do more with what we have to help more people? We were making changes, great, went from 4 people a month we could get out of homelessness to 12 people a month, that was great, and we just really hit this ceiling. And it wasn't about the supportive services, it wasn't even about paying rent, it was just about there's no housing available. And at the same time, 10 years ago, there's sort of felt like, it was always an expensive place to be here in Santa Cruz, to the point that more and more professions, more and more full-time employment couldn't afford housing here. And that certainly included the social services workers, who we were partnering with to try to help people who are homeless. They were being, employed out of housing in a way. So I just felt like that was great. I could volunteer in a lot of those other things, but this is some work that I was suited to, that I felt I could do. And I became very passionate about, we're not going to solve so many problems. Homelessness is just one. We're not, climate change is another. We're not going to make the kind of progress we want to make in our community, our state, without addressing housing. So I dove into that, and with the idea that we can build rental housing in California much more often than we do. It just doesn't happen a lot because there's something more profitable to do, like expensive condos. And because it's hard, and there are a lot of challenges with doing it. And so I started New Way Homes, which is a nonprofit that uses impact investment primarily to fund new housing development. And the reason I did that is because there is public money put into creating affordable housing, which is great, and we're doing somewhat more of it again in California, which is great. We need more, but it's not enough. And it all gets used. And I felt like if I'm going to start projects that just compete for those same tax dollars and tax credits, it's just going to be even harder for everyone to get projects to get those, and the same number of projects are going to get built, right? So I felt like, okay, we got to find another way. And a big part of that was getting individuals, foundations like the Community Foundation here, Dignity Health, that's now Common Spirit, those kind of parties to pool money together in New Way Homes and expect a low return, a few percent a year return, and use that money to seed housing projects and move them through the process where they can get built. And have those projects not be trying to maximize profit, and maybe build a little affordable housing in them, like it's now required to do, but flip that script. Maybe have a little profit for some of the folks involved, like the investors who put money in at the very beginning, but a capped, set amount, and try to maximize affordability. So that's our model, it's what we try to do. And as it happened, Chris took a long time to bring this about, put together money, get projects started. One of the most successful ways we've been advancing in doing that and doing projects is with churches. Sometimes other nonprofits. We have a couple of projects with Housing Matters, the homeless services campus here in town, for example. But most of our projects are with churches. There just was such a fit between this idea that okay, we may not be taking a lot of government money to do this, but we can still hold the mission first. And that we're here to serve folks, but we have to make it work financially. All those things together, that's been working well. And this was the first church we started with, but it's been a long journey. Long journey, and that happens. And it happens in every project. Some projects, that's a longer journey than others. The reason I'm here today is because we are nearing the end of this first phase of work. And I'm going to explain what that means. Sometimes I call this the wandering in the desert phase, because you are trying a lot of things out, this direction, that direction, and often find you go in that direction for a while and nothing's there. And you may get a glimpse of the promised land, but there's a lot of reasons you're not getting there yet. It's all, and that was a lot of that with this project. It's a complicated site, complicated geology, complicated topography. And we all have to have a project that meets all our interests and needs, to make this work, especially the mission. And it has to work financially, those things. So, but what I mean by nearing the end is the end of that wandering in the desert phase, imperfect analogy, but that's what always pops in my head, is we find a direction that is really a good answer for the project. What can the project be with all the rules, all the interests, all the needs, and the finances, etc. And then the end of that phase is we give the city, jurisdiction in this case, the city, a plan that is our proposed plan. That won't be exactly what the final plan is, but we've got a plan that we think is pretty good given all those constraints and opportunities. And we're going to do that. We've fully committed to the church. We'll do that the latest by November 15th. We're shooting for November 1st, so we're within 30 days here of when we're going to hand that plan to the city. That is just the first phase, but it's the most uncertain and the longest phase. The next phase is the phase where the city tells us what they need more detail on in that. It's not designed down to every little thing, but they say, over here we want a little more explanation on this, or a little on that, on this phase, before we give you the blessing that you're clear to do a project. And then it's also the finding fault. It's the test. It's getting that plan out in the world, and it's all of us looking at it. Everybody who here who wants to looking at it, and its neighbors looking at it, and cities of 5 different city departments and the fire department, and others looking at it and saying, the fire hydrant's a little too far from where the truck would pull off, and still allow cars to evacuate. Everything. And meanwhile in that we look at into more details of internal to the building, the bedrooms, layouts, and that kind of stuff. We do some of that work in that phase too. So that is the phase we're going to enter, is the refining the plan, finding flaws, telling everyone about it, all those things, and then continuing our process of design through that too. One example I'll just put out there is that in this plan we give to the city, there's a certain amount of explanations on parking that we have to provide to them, and we'll do that. But it's not the full parking plan that the church would want to understand and see. So we're going to, in this phase, within 30 days here, so we're giving this whole plan for this development to the city, and it'll include a bunch of things about how many parking spots are on campus, how many will be there with the building, how that meets the needs of the building and of the church. But that may not be what all of us in the room, everything we want to understand about parking. Where are the residents going to park versus the church and the events and the different stuff like that. And so we're going to, while the city is reviewing this plan, which is going to take some number of months, and then come back with feedback and changes they want or explanations they want, the parking is something we're going to take some more steps on. And we've committed to the church representatives here this winter will provide the church with a more detailed proposed parking plan. It still doesn't have to be perfect, feedback is wanted, etc. But it gives you an idea. All that is to give some examples of where we're at in the process. So you may have glanced at some of these images that were out there. I'm going to put them up, say some things about them here as a way to introduce this. If you carefully study these images, you might find some contradictions between the plans and images. And that is understood. That's not unintentional in a way. And it's because we have, as we're getting to this goal, we will have a consistent, non internally consistent plan that we're giving to the city here. But right now, there's a lot of feverish work going on this right now. The architects, the civil engineers, and the landscapers, those are the three primary, the landscape architect, those are three primary folks, and there's others, the arborist, who is refining his arborist report, other things. But those three, and they're swirling around each other. You know, the architect realized they need to change something here, and that affects the civil engineers do, which affects the landscape architect. So, you know, these pieces are changing. And so I'm just going to pull up the site plan, and you'll have more chance right at the end to come up and look. But this will remind us a little bit as to, sure, yeah, okay, we're going to put it on here. And maybe if I'm not moving around, maybe the video will have a better chance of capturing it. And so this, you can see this is maybe sideways from how we think of campus, but High Street here. This whole area is not filled in yet. It will get filled in because it's relevant. And so we're going to have surveyors come out here in the next 2 or 3 weeks to survey this. It's not the key part of the project, but we do need to show parking and the traffic flow within the campus. So we'll be getting some more things on the survey. Existing church buildings. And then we have many plans, you know, we're looking at for buildings, arrangement, and there's a lot of constraints. And what we come up with is something where, you know, you need to get a certain amount of units to make this feasible to build in this location, but we wanted to not take up all this area up here, you know, a lot of things. And so what we've, in the end, came up with is this kind of two-winged building like this, where this area, we'll see images of it in a minute, but this wing along here has some articulation, and the top floor looks a little different than the other floors to give it not be too monolithic. It's got features, and those will continue to refine. They're not going to be exactly like we see them here, but you can see the concept we're going for. Where this wing is four-story building, and then this steps up. So this whole top part is a 2-story part, and it kind of steps up the slope like that. So that's the building. There's a lot of things around the building to be worked on and figured out. And a big one is stormwater management. We could give a whole talk just on stormwater management. I'm not going to do that today, but I'm happy to answer any questions people have on any of the details on where they stand, what we're still working out. But that's a big deal. There'll be a lot of planters around this that are landscaping, but they're contained landscaping so that stormwater can flow into them. They can hold a lot of stormwater and more slowly release that out into the city stormwater system. And there'll be underground tanks. We're thinking down here, but that could evolve, you know, to hold water for that as well. There's a lot of requirements when you're building a new sizable building. Changing the impervious surface of the site, unlike when the church was built and the parking lots were built. Now, you know, you really have to capture that stormwater, release it pretty slowly. And so a lot of work on that, and a lot of that involves landscaping, which is pretty cool. And ingress and egress being worked on continually, all those things. So I'll put I guess something that's not on these images yet. We're going to develop an image of what this looks like from up here. We know our neighbors, these houses are shown a little too close to the property line. We'll get that fixed on the next image too. They're a little bit further back. But, you know, the view from the neighbors up here is a very important thing to our neighbors, for sure. And we've tried to respect that throughout this whole process. That's been one of the design goals, is to have good views from this project and good views, continue to have good views from the neighboring houses. I think we've done that, in the end, done that very well. And we want to show them that, how in a lot of ways their view will be improved, and they'll totally look over top of this building, and this will be over to the side and not hugely impactful. And so, especially because there continues to be a slope here. So, and in any case, that's something we're going to develop. The reason you see this, and again, I know you can't see it from back there, but take a look, but there's some notes here, some scribbles on here that are about landscaping. And the reason that's just in a small area up here that goes across the slope is because for this to be open space, for there to be an open space feature that's an amenity for folks who live here and continue to be for the church as well, it has to be accessible. So it has to be some of the space that we count as open space for residents in the plan, which there has to be a bunch, has got to be fully accessible, someone in a wheelchair, walker, etc. And there's got to be accessible path of travel to get to it. And so that fully accessible path of travel will be using the elevator in the building, come out here. And so that's why there's quite a bit. And there's, we think of it as a terrace up there, but many of you know it's pretty sloped, actually. It's like, it's like a 10% slope on that terrace. And so it would be a huge amount of grading to flatten any sizable amount of it out. And so some degree of decks and features outside that everyone can enjoy will go across where we don't have to grade a lot to get a fair amount of area, but then all the rest of the area will still be accessible, and we can look at, I don't mean accessible in handicap accessible, I just mean available for people to use in various ways, and we're still going to explore what makes sense to do there. But we want to keep a lot of it fairly natural, as well. Okay, that's enough on that for now, and again, we'll take lots of questions in a minute.
For the benefit of the camera.
Yeah.
When you're talking about something,
okay.
Use this one or these two, and then I'll...
Okay, great, perfect. There's lots of caveats here, exactly like the colors of the building and exactly what material is the siding of the building. That's not dialed in, it's not real specific yet. We'll have some initial things we'll propose with this plan, but even after we submit, those things can change. We'll welcome conversation about them. Tried to give this building, we have it's that lot and dirt lot area is fairly narrow before the super steep hillside, which is much more expensive to build on. We looked at how much can we build on it and came up with, it's only thing that's feasible is this kind of a wing of the building going kind of perpendicular to that slope. So it's a narrow strip we have to work with, and we don't want the building right up at where the parking is currently. We want some setback and area there. So what we came up with is ways to try to give it some articulation. And so that's a view of the building. All this landscaping that's shown here, there will be landscaping. Don't think there's necessarily going to be lush green lawn. That's not a best practice there. But the landscaping shown was just what the architects put in this rendering. The landscape architect separately is really working as what that should be. But this is meant to evoke things that we do want some not super tall trees in here probably. There will be, this is like a big planter that I mentioned, like an area that actually is a stormwater container, but actually has lots of plants in it to make it much nicer. And, a trash, little trash building, over here. So, and a path that goes around behind the building, so some folks will access their units, may choose to access their units from the external stairway that's out behind, but the main entrance to the project would be down at that end. So I'll move this. And so this kind of called the knuckle of the building, where the two wings are close to each other, is where the main entrance would be. And so from here, there needs to be accessible parking spaces, and this is kind of where there's a current row of parking, and then a ramp, but I think the ramp would be for everybody, not just like, handicap ramp that only is occasionally used, but would be a much wider ramp, and people go up to get to the main entrance of the building, which would be over here. So again, we're looking at having nice features here, but exactly what those are is not fully determined yet in terms of planters, outdoor seating, bike parking for guests, inside bike parking for residents, etc. So it gives an idea, and this wall here, it may end up having a couple windows in it, and this is just something put on there to give an idea that we want to do something with that wall to give it some beauty, some texture. Could be mural, could be something else. there. So, and then around this side of the building, I'm still determining, like seems like an outdoor walkway, stairway, fully compliant stairs parallel to the building would need to be provided to go up to each floor of the building as it's terraced up the hillside and then eventually around. So we're looking at an external path on this side of the building that would do that. And lastly, I printed out this was more from the landscape architect's point of view of trying to look at, thank you, as I had described before, this is where there's an existing row of parking, and right now there's a fence right at the top of it, but instead there would be some accessible parking and a wide entrance ramp going up into the entrance to the building. So we're working on, as I said, examining what that could be, different ideas for seating, etc. So there's many topics we could talk about, but that gives you an idea of some of what we're putting together. Right now, the building, internal to the building, there's 42 apartments. That could always go up or down a tiny bit, but that's roughly what fits in there. And a couple areas of the building are co-living, so it's something we've explored with the church representatives for a few years now. That's a minority of the building for sure, but it's something that, a lot of houses in Santa Cruz get turned into co-living, which is a group of individuals renting together who are not an immediate family. And that, the houses, the neighborhoods, they're not necessarily perfectly set up for that. Whereas here we're trying to have, again, a minority of this building be a product that's really good for that. And I think that's something that can work well, meet a really important need. We're seeing more projects like that in the Bay Area as well, and how they're managed to work really well as a community, not a dorm, but a community. A lot of young professionals, including folks on my own staff, live in environments like that, love those kind of communities, especially at that stage of life, but it could be a wide variety of ages as well. So we're trying to make a little bit of co-living product that doesn't exist a lot in Santa Cruz right now. And then other apartments, and some of those will be lower income affordable apartments, some will be market rate apartments that'll help pay for the project. So I'll stop there and just ask what else you're interested in hearing more about at this point.
So
Yes.
not everybody knows exactly. Can you give a short definition of what co-living is and what that would look like physically in terms of, would it be a super apartment or
There's, it can be many things, but in this case and within an apartment building like this and within, the City of Santa Cruz code, what we do is we have a few apartments, 3 or 4 apartments that each have a few bedrooms, 3 to 5 bedrooms each, and those apartments are fairly small in terms of the room outside the bedrooms is not very big. And normally if you make a 3-bedroom or 4-bedroom apartment, you got a fair amount of room, there's a number of people there that's outside of the bedrooms. But in this case, there's the bedrooms, there's not much room outside the bedrooms, and then outside of those 3 or 4 units, there's a whole nother space that is a large kitchen, living, and dining room that's accessible to all of those 3 or 4 units, but not accessible to everybody else in the building. See, so what then you've got is a, I've toured these, I've talked to all the companies that manage them and everything, but you've got a little community of 12 to 18 people that are, they have a bunch of, in each unit has a little kitchenette, a little seating area, so you don't have to be in the group space, but they have a large group space that's, a kitchen with 2 refrigerators, and beautiful space to be with each other. So that's a model that, a lot of folks are really choosing, but it also is a model that's more affordable. So we can get the total rent, let's say rent per square foot, that allows us to pay for the building, but each bedroom rents for less than a studio apartment. A new studio apartment in town would rent, or an old studio apartment really would rent. So it's a way to charge less single individual, and yet get the rent per square foot that pays for the building. And that doesn't have to count as one of our affordable units, which is a more traditional 1, 2, or 3 bedroom that's at an affordable rate for lower income. So that's kind of a full explanation. Yeah.
On a square foot basis, you get more income from the co-living than you do from a regular apartment, or is it the same, or what?
Yeah, it's about the same as a market rate apartment, but market rate new construction apartments are very expensive. So it's a way, I mean, they're expensive to build and the rent's very high, right? And so it's a way to achieve that without just building a fancy apartment that's $3,000 or $4,000 a month. You know, it's a way to build some of the area of this where we get that rent to pay for a very expensive building, but the individuals are each not paying a lot by comparison.
When do you project groundbreaking? And I know there are so many things in between, but what?
Yeah, so this next phase is still somewhat uncertain timeline-wise because of this plan development process we have to go through with the city. They're not obligated to specific turnaround times with our plans and stuff. So if it went super well, we'd get planning permits in 6 months, but it also could take a year, So I think that's the range for this next phase. And then once we get that, that's like the blessing of yes, you can build something that conforms to all these things that we've now agreed to with the city. Then we have to do all the engineering and design. That's the kind of blueprints level design. And that's more than $1 million of work to design the building at that down to the construction level, right? So that has to go to the building department, and they've got to plan check it and get the permits and everything. So that's close to a year. So I think I would like to have in my head at this point, I'd really like to start construction in 2 years, but it could be faster, it could be even slower. And then you run into winter grading as the toughest time to start.
Well, I get a question.
Yes.
Does the project require city council approval, or is it one of those projects that if you meet all the regulations, it's permitted? That's the first question. The second question is the mix of bedrooms.
Yeah.
In other words, how many studios, how many 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, things like that.
Yep. Okay, so on the first one, yes, this will require city council approval. The reason is we're meeting all the zoning requirement details. When you put local zoning law and state law together and everything, we're meeting every single one except for one thing. And that is that we're allowed to build this many units here, even more, significantly more than this number of units is allowed to be built on this whole property, but not in one building. You would have to, under the zoning rules, you would have to be perfectly compliant and get the benefit of that somewhat more automatic approval. This 42 units would each have to be separate houses scattered all over the property. And that's not ideal for all kinds of ways, many of which are probably obvious. So that's an exception. And so that triggers a bunch of things and means that, yes, we've got to get all the way to city council approval.
It will be a common interest, but it will be rentals.
It will be a rental apartment building, yes, not condo mapped. Yeah.
I'm afraid I set a very bad example asking the first question without using the microphone. So I'm going to repent of that publicly and ask you all not to repeat my mistake. Because we want to include the people who are on camera. So I'm going to ask Sibley to recognize questions as they come. Wait for the microphone to come to you, please, so that we can get everybody in.
So while you take the microphone to the next person, I will answer the second question as best I can, which is I feel like still the internal of this building is being messed with a little bit, but in our plan going to the city, like I said, there's about 42 units total, and I think there's about 10 of them that are studios or 1 bedrooms. And then there's about 7 that are these co-living units that are really just 2, I would call them 2 co-living units, but they really make up 7 apartments from the city code point of view, counting toward that 42 total, and the rest are mostly 2-bedroom. There might be 1 3-bedroom apartment. Yeah. But again, the 2-bedroom versus 3-bedroom, that's one of the things that's changing the most right now. Yeah.
This is a big question, and you may want to defer to another time, but I'm wondering what are the relationships, sort of somewhat unspoken, with UCSC? Would faculty be able to rent here, or students? Or?
Yeah, and that is the kind of thing we want to co-create with the church. And that's, since we started this journey 5 years ago with this church, we have more formalized this model. We're doing it with other churches, and that's something where, some of that conversation has already happened, but more will happen as it comes into the focus, exactly what all are the units and all that kind of stuff. So, and we recognize this is on the church's property, next to the church, and so the details of how it's managed, who the community is, really needs to be, have the church's consent, have buy-in and approval. Now, we think one of my priorities I bring to this, which has resonated well, as I understand it, with the church representatives, is that this is aiming to be a relatively low car development. Not no cars, people will have cars, but and this is not in the way that we think everybody wants to live, but there is incredible demand in Santa Cruz for somewhat more affordable apartments if, in order to achieve that, there's less parking available or fewer cars used, especially if that can work. It's just a lot of demand for that. And so that's something we think is a good location for a variety of ways. We'll help people with bikes and e-bikes. We're going to have shared cars. We're committing to a couple shared vehicles, all that kind of stuff. And naturally, thinking about who works right by here is another way to achieve that. This is officially considered a low vehicle miles traveled location, but we want to really make it that. And so, we don't have, one of the nice things of not using public funds in this is we don't have firm, any government commitments as to exactly how we market most of the units. So we can go to UCSC, we can go to the teachers at Westlake School, who we've already met with and met with the superintendent multiple times on this project, and say, hey, when we have units available, we want to come to you first because you've got employment right here, and it could be affordable units for staff, and it could be any of the units for faculty or whatever. Make those available and see if anybody wants them, and if not, so we're not obligated to start on Craigslist. Instead of or a lottery or whatever. Fair housing law is very important, but we absolutely can go to neighbors like that and offer. So that's it. It's just a vision at this point. There's no firm commitment as to how we do that or how much of that we do. We've heard loud and clear from the beginning from the church, this is not a primarily student housing that we're building here. It's not. Even the co-living, it's not primarily undergrads, there's a few quiet students, it might be great, but, there's also huge demand for that product from young professionals who work downtown, from, all kinds of folks, or grad students or other folks. So that's my comments at this point. Yes.
Thank you. Two-part question for you. You mentioned that there's roughly 42 units.
Yeah.
That can change, that's not set in stone. I'm curious what proportion of those are considered affordable? What number of those 42? And then also, you mentioned that the project is not contemplating using any government funds. I'm curious if you are applying for any kind of density bonus or anything else under the state laws.
Yeah.
Could you
So,
repeat the question?
What's that?
Repeat the question.
Yeah, so there's a couple parts to the question. One part is affordability. And so the straightforward parts of that answer are, one, the church has been very clear from the beginning to have as a guiding star that we're shooting for 25% of the units being affordable. And generally, when we say affordable, it's generally affordable to lower income households. And so what rent is means different things for size of household, number of bedrooms, that kind of stuff. But that is a guiding star. Exactly how we do that, what form that takes, or can we do more than that, or whatever, that's to go along with the project. Like I said, our priority as an organization is to maximize affordability. Sometimes that's making a project more affordable over time. It can be different things. This co-living we see as not necessarily counting toward that 25%, but it is an element of affordability, making a product that can help pay for the project, but where individuals are able to rent something for somewhat less. So that is, so we think about all kinds of things on that. Yes, we're going to use, so the city now requires any apartment building of any size like this to have 20% of the units affordable to low income. So, and that's a deed restriction in perpetuity, or something you record on the property that's in perpetuity. So that we will of course meet. And then yes, we're going to use density bonus law. We're not actually getting more units from that. The main thing you think of it from density bonus is if you do affordable housing, you can build more total number of units. There's plenty of density allowed on this parcel, we're not even using it all. That's just what fits, and what fits within the vision of the whole project. So we're not doing more units, but it does allow us to do other things. That's what allows us to do the hike we're doing within one apartment building. And then we can have more concessions on zoning if we need them. I'm not sure that we do, but as we go with the city, it gives us a little bit of flexibility of how we apply zoning law. So we'll have that flexibility, and in order to get that, that means 15% of the total 42 units will be affordable to very low income. And it's also part of the mission of New Way Homes. We always put down a marker, again, maximizing affordability, but we're only going to even start on a project if we know we can maximize that bonus density law percentage, whether or not we're using all the benefits of it. I felt like there might have been a whole different component to your question that I wanted. Okay, great. So we need a mic. Yes,
the microphone.
Did I hear you correctly that there would be at least one unit that would have 12 to 18 people sharing a kitchen and living area?
It's not one unit, so it's 3 or 4 units. And each of those units, to be a unit, has to have its own small kitchen and living area. But then in addition, there would be a large kitchen and living and dining area. So it's an additional but much larger one that is for that number of bedrooms. So a number of us from PCNI Church and myself went up to the Bay Area and toured a place like this as well. So yes, happy to talk more about it as well. But yeah.
So have you made provisions for managing this shared space? Would you have a manager live there, make sure people clean up after themselves and such?
There's a couple levels of that. So like I said, there is a whole best practices on how co-living is managed. And one level is managing the whole apartment building. Yes, there will be a manager's unit in the apartment building. We're required to have that. We're going to have that. So there'll be somebody living on site that has certain roles and responsibilities. And then we have, we'll have a professional management team overall for the property, for the building. The co-living units, yes, there's some things that management does and some things that tenants are required to be organized and do. And then, there's whole systems for that.
When students line up to try to rent these spaces, would it be considered discriminatory if they do not rent according to how they are lined up to rent?
It's the question was about, if students apply to rent spaces, wouldn't it be discriminatory? Probably would be discriminatory to just say no on the basis that they are a student. And so that's not something that we would do We're going to follow fair housing law. Most of these units are either some lower income affordable units, and there is a process for qualifying for those that is generally not something that students qualify for apartments. Or there's market rate units. And like I said, we'd like to go to some of the employers in the area, and we certainly can do that. So, and then the co-living, there's sort of a process where you choose folks who are going to be leaders in one co-living area, and then you work with them to choose additional tenants. So I think there's a process that is what meets our other goals anyway, that we're going to go through on this, that is not posting vacancies on Craigslist. And yes, if some students come and want to rent a 3-bedroom apartment as it's rented, we will consider them as well. And they will be required to, live and behave according to the, the rules and guidelines we have for the property, and there's nothing to say that they can't do that. But I believe, and there's a vision for how we do this, how we manage it, or that's not going to be really frequent.
I find it difficult to get a perspective on the size of the building. I'm wondering if you can put up like story poles. I've seen some in San Jose where they do that. Tape around the outside so you can see what the size of the building will be.
Yeah, I'm sure we could certainly stake out the footprint at some point. I have to learn more about, I know what you're referring to. I don't know the costs and of doing it safely and stuff, so would have to look into that. But I understand what you're saying, for sure. And we'll think about how else we can also do it one way or another. Yeah.
Even with the drawing you have, I see the building, but I don't see it in perspective.
We'll have more imagery with more perspective and other buildings in it. It's just literally had to interrupt the architects in the middle of all their stuff and saying, give me a couple of renderings from at least these points of view. So recognize those are not perfect for imagining, envisioning, how it entirely fits into campus, but we'll be getting there. Go ahead.
Hey, simply, just real quick, St. Stephen's Lutheran Church on Soquel has a senior housing project on their property. They don't have the graded hill. Do you recall how many units?
Yeah, 60, around 60.
And these are full-on apartments. They're quite large. But I think that is a nice way to kind of get a perspective if anybody wanted to drive over and see.
Yeah, that's within the city on Soquel Avenue, just a little bit before it gets to the freeway. Yeah.
So point to somebody.
Yeah. Right here, we'll go down this row, 1 and then 2, pass the microphone along there, yeah.
I'm wondering about the back of the building.
Yeah.
And what are the apartments all the way through, or are the apartments, double apartments as you're going?
The building's not wide enough to be double loaded, so the apartments go all the way through, and there's exterior walkways on the back with the staircases that go down and a path on the bottom level. So eventually we will have visualizations of that as well. But then on the wing that goes up the hill, then, in a way, this side is the front of the building, and people are looking out there, and that side has more of the trees and the back, and that's where we're actively working right now to figure out how we can have a stairway that goes up with landings and stuff parallel to the building to have an external access.
So an apartment would have access both front and back.
That's right, apartment goes all the way through the building, looks out front and looks out back, yeah. Go ahead, yeah.
I'm wondering if your co-living could be somehow fused with the idea of co-housing, like Walnut Commons, so you would have a group of people that would be more permanent owners and really take care of their property the way Walnut Commons does.
Yeah, so the idea of this is it's the rental version of that. In order to have ownership, then we have to condo map, and that's a different process.
It's out of the question.
And it's out of the question from the church's point of view. Yeah, I was trying to figure out how to say that, but Jim, I just quoted Jim. Yeah. So that was one of our things from the beginning. The church is going to continue to own the land, and we're leasing this improved land from the church and managing it in ways agreed upon between us and the church, which can evolve over time, etc. So, yeah, I love that. I'd like to figure out how to get more folks into ownership at affordable levels, but this is a rental project. Yeah.
Hi, I live up there. I work for the university, and so I remember the last time we engaged with that community and how the rumors were flying and everything. I just wanted to make a quick comment that I know you're preparing to interface with those neighbors in a couple of weeks. And just to get ahead of a couple of things, like there's a deep love for that oak tree, and somehow some kids got heard a rumor of some adults saying that you guys were going to go in and chop down the oak tree. And so, like, those little things, I think, in terms of kind of getting ahead of the rumors, I would say, like, make sure that you emphasize those kinds of things and some of the other crazy stuff that people were, and like you said, like, having views of what it's going to look like, I think will really, really help. And then also just really emphasizing all the ways in which you've tried so hard to mitigate some of the concerns. So I really appreciate everything you've done. And good luck, because I'm going to be out of the country, unfortunately.
Thank you. Yes, in 2 Sundays we'll be back, and in the afternoon we're going to invite any of those neighbors who want to come, down to talk with us about it, talk with the church representatives about it, and we're going to have, more of the view from that location. Unequivocally, we are not going to touch the live oak tree that's beautiful, that's back up there in the corner, period, full stop. Everything is even going to be a long way, even all the construction is going to be a long ways away from it. So but what we appreciate hearing, what are the concerns, and some of them about what we are planning to do, some of them about what we're not planning to do. Anything you can pass along to the church representatives on that, and the folks on the housing committee on that helps us know what to be ready to communicate about. Thank you. Question up here in front.
Are there any conceptual plans yet for what to do with that slope that's full of acacia at the moment?
Yes, so we've had an arborist report, and the landscape architect is looking at it. One element of the plan is removing the acacia. So, I like that plan. The church representatives really independently urged that to be a part of the plan. What will be planted there? We want to, help control erosion and not have something that's going to grow super tall, super fast. That's where we, look to get something from our landscape architect, and not all of that will be in this first planning submission because he's focused now on what does the city need to know, what's all the stuff the city needs to know about a landscaping plan. Then he will continue to work, and then we'll get more of all the things we all want to know about that. And then we'll have plenty of time for feedback, because those, but native plants, drought-tolerant plants, things that aren't going to grow 40 feet tall, those are, the very basics of the characteristics. But we want something also that looks nice. We recognize that, these views are pretty spectacular in the back of these apartments that go all the way through the building. They're looking at a steep slope. It's going to be a slope, but we want it to look nice too. Yeah.
Mike, say something about the big eucalyptus trees.
Yes, so there's a whole lot of trees on the campus, which is great, by and large. Some number of them, 30 some of them or something, are heritage trees. So that means, the only thing that means is that they're more than 14 inches in diameter. Doesn't mean they're a tree that we love, there doesn't mean they're a native tree, whatever. And some of those, but the city ordinance, that's what the city ordinance cares about, is are you removing any trees that are 14 inches in diameter or greater? And there's recognition that sometimes when you do something new, you have to remove trees of that size. We would be removing some because some are where the building is going to go, or right next to it, and construction would disturb those. There are others that the arborist said, these trees are in really bad shape. At some point they'll fall down. Those are ones we recommend you remove. Whenever you remove heritage trees, you got to plant new trees, so we'll figure out a whole plan for what that should be. So all that's fine and totally customary, normal, that's what we'll do. In addition to that, you know, both we, thinking about this project long-term, and the church, feels that there's several very large eucalyptus trees, some sort of in the middle right at the top of the slope, and some in the back corner of the property, that are not ones that the arborist says would have to be removed for the construction, or really should be removed because they're in terrible condition. They're just other large eucalyptus trees, and we would like to remove them. And you know, what we hear is mutual interest in removing them. So we are going to put in our plan to the city that we're going to remove them, and we will plant other, you know, more native trees in locations that work for everybody. We will see how the city responds to that. That's not something we can guarantee we can get approval of. I'm hoping in the whole plan development framework that's seen as an appropriate thing, or done, you know, and we have done the biotic study, and there's not butterflies actively using this eucalyptus, etc. But, you know, can't guarantee how that will come out. Yeah.
So back to the slope behind the building there, we were talking about previously. And looking at the site plan, it certainly seems like the construction is going to be very close to the parking area. And there's a lot of room along that slope. Why have you chosen to make it so far forward, not more into the slope?
So, a couple reasons. We're not that close. There's not a lot of room between us and the slope when you account for the general city requirement is to have a setback from a steep slope like that. And we need walkways behind the building, and we need stormwater system behind the building to capture everything that's running down the slope and bring it out. And it's very expensive to, in such a long area, do a huge retaining wall, you know, grading a retaining wall. So we're trying to balance all those things, and we do feel like we have squished the plan back toward the slope as far as we can go. We'll keep looking at that, but it is everything that has to happen without building a huge structure to retain the slope. You know, we're feeling like we have put it back as far as we can. And then, similarly, you know, we want enough area up here to have landscaping between the parking and the building. And so, you know, there's most of the distance, you know, if you look at the width of the building, and this last rectangle here is the outdoor walkway, stairways, etc. You know, the width of the actual building, you know, you're most of that width in the space between the parking and the building. So that's what we've come up with, balancing everything there. And we really, some of you know, we really looked at how to build on more of the slope, and then it just gets crazy expensive. And so that's one of those things, you balance between everything else we want to do and affordability, and it so far, costs of construction are still a lot more than they were before the pandemic. It's always a struggle. So we felt like, okay, there's a certain amount of building on the slope we can do, but, you know, beyond that, it gets to be really mainly an engineering project. Okay, feel free to...
Here on the campus, when you say the word eucalyptus, you're supposed to spittle. There's hiccups.
Never know how everybody feels, so I try to... but yeah, fair enough. I'll stick around for a little bit here. Feel free to ask me things directly if you want. And then always, you know, if you have other questions as time goes on, direct them to the church representatives, Jim and Weller and John Hall and Bill Walton here, and they will contact us. And we're in constant, at this stage, we're in constant communication. So I always love to get information out as we can.
Thank you, Sydney.
Will you hang around for a couple of minutes? Thanks, folks. And Sydney will be around for a few minutes if you want to say hey. Thank you.
All right. Well, enjoy the rest of your Sunday, Doug.
Thank you very much, Jim. Yeah. We'll do our best. I think he did a fine job.
Oh yeah, I know he's attended